This is a message from a viewer named Dennis, and when I finished reading his email, I just sat there staring at my screen for probably 15 minutes. It's not your typical Western guy gets scammed in Vietnam story. It's something far more calculated and heartbreaking. Because Dennis wasn't some naive tourist who fell for the first pretty face he met in Ho Chi Minh City. He was methodical, careful, even paranoid in the best way possible. Before he ever set foot in Vietnam, he spent 18 months secretly learning Vietnamese, studying every night after work, hiring online tutors, watching Vietnamese YouTube channels until he could understand conversations at normal speed. And when he finally met Nung, when he fell in love and married her and moved to Vietnam permanently, he never told her he spoke the language. For 3.5 years, he played the role of the clueless foreigner who smiled and nodded while his wife translated. And for 3.5 years, he listened to everything, every family conversation, every phone call, every whispered discussion his wife thought he couldn't understand. What Dennis overheard in his own kitchen one afternoon would reveal a multi-year plan involving his wife's ex-boyfriend, her entire family, and the inheritance they were all patiently waiting to collect after he died. This isn't just a scam story. It's about the devastating moment when someone realizes that every tender moment, every I love you, every shared meal might have been nothing but performance. What you're about to hear might make you paranoid, heartbroken, maybe even grateful you learned this lesson through someone else's pain. Because if Dennis Hargrove, a 54-year-old IT professional who literally learned an entire language just to protect himself, could be played this thoroughly, then it's a reminder that these operations are more sophisticated than most people realize. My name is Dennis Hargrove, and I need to tell you about the 3.5 years I spent married to a woman who thought I couldn't understand a word she was saying. But before you judge how I ended up back in Oregon at 57, living alone in a rental apartment and working contract IT jobs to rebuild savings I thought were secure, you need to understand why I learned Vietnamese in secret, and what that decision ultimately revealed. While you're watching, let me know where you're tuning in from. I always check the comments. And if these stories resonate with you, there's a little super thanks button below. Totally optional, but it helps me keep telling stories like this that most people are too ashamed to share. If you've been enjoying the stories I tell, please consider hitting the subscribe button. Your support is crucial for the growth of this channel and helps me dedicate time to making these videos, despite my commitment to a full-time job. Thank you for being here. Picture this: Portland, Oregon, 2019. I'm 50 years old, sitting in a conference room at Providence Health Systems, watching my manager explain that my position is being restructured. Corporate speak for we're moving your job to a cheaper location and you're too expensive to keep. I'd been a systems administrator there for 16 years. Good job, decent pay, stable. I managed servers, handled security protocols, solved problems that kept the hospital network running. I was good at it, not because I was brilliant, but because I was methodical and careful. I checked everything twice. I planned for disasters that might never happen. I was the guy who read the entire manual before assembling furniture. They offered me a severance package, 6 months' salary, plus the option to cash out my $401k early with the penalty waived due to the restructuring. Altogether, about $180,000. Combined with what I'd saved over the years and the equity from my small condo in Beaverton, I'd have about $320,000. At 50, that should have been enough to partially retire, maybe do some consulting work, enjoy life a little. But I had nothing to enjoy it with. I'd been divorced for 8 years. My ex-wife Karen had left me for one of her coworkers, a sales guy with an MBA and better social skills. The divorce had been expensive and humiliating. She'd gotten the house we'd spent 10 years renovating together. I'd gotten a 1-bedroom condo and a therapist's business card. No kids. We'd tried for years, spent tens of thousands on fertility treatments, and it never happened. After the divorce, I was relieved, in a way at least. There were no custody battles, no child support, no forced interactions with Karen at school events. But it also meant I had no real family. My parents were both dead, mom from breast cancer when I was 35. Dad from a stroke 3 years later. I was an only child. No siblings, no nieces or nephews, no cousins I was close to. Just me and a handful of college friends I saw maybe twice a year for beers and small talk about jobs and politics. I was 50 years old, suddenly unemployed, with $320,000 in the bank, and absolutely nothing tying me to Portland. That's when I started reading the forums. I'd always been interested in Southeast Asia, the culture, the history, the food. I'd watched Anthony Bourdain's Vietnam episode probably 20 times. After the divorce, I'd taken a solo trip to Thailand and loved it. The warmth, the friendliness, how far my money went, how alive everything felt compared to Portland's gray drizzle and reserved politeness. The expat forums were full of men like me, divorced, retired early, living in Thailand or Vietnam or the Philippines on a fraction of what they'd spend in the U.S. Some of the stories were success stories. Guys who'd found genuine relationships, built small businesses, seemed genuinely happy. But there were just as many horror stories. Men who'd been scammed out of their life savings. Men who'd married local women only to discover they had boyfriends or multiple sponsors. Men who couldn't own property, couldn't get legal recourse when things went wrong, ended up broke and stranded thousands of miles from home. The common denominator in almost every scam story was language. The men didn't speak Thai, didn't speak Vietnamese, didn't speak Tagalog. They were completely dependent on their girlfriends or wives to translate, to explain what was happening, to handle all the communication. And that dependency made them vulnerable. I read one story that stuck with me. A British guy in Pattaya who'd been married to a Thai woman for 7 years. He finally learned enough Thai to understand basic conversations and discovered his wife had been telling everyone in the village he was senile and couldn't manage money. Meanwhile, she'd been transferring his pension to her Thai boyfriend every month. That's when I got the idea. If I was ever going to pursue a relationship in Southeast Asia, I'd do it with a massive advantage. I'd understand everything, even conversations people assumed I couldn't follow. I decided on Vietnam. The economy was growing. The expat community was smaller and less seedy than Thailand, and Vietnamese seemed learnable. It had a Latin alphabet, at least unlike Thai script. For 18 months, before I ever bought a plane ticket, I studied Vietnamese obsessively. I started with Duolingo, then moved to more serious resources. I hired tutors on italki Vietnamese teachers who did hour-long lessons over video chat. I watched Vietnamese YouTube channels, Vietnamese news, Vietnamese soap operas with subtitles. I joined Vietnamese language Discord servers and practiced with native speakers who thought I was just another language nerd. I was careful never to mention I was planning to move there. I told my tutors I was learning for work, that my company was expanding to Vietnam, and I wanted to be prepared. I never brought up relationships or marriage or anything that would make them warn me or give me advice. Every evening after work, I'd study for 2 to 3 hours. Vocabulary, grammar, pronunciation. Vietnamese has 6 tones, and getting them wrong means saying completely different words. It's not like Spanish where you can butcher the accent and still be understood. You have to get the tones right or you're speaking gibberish. It was hard. Maybe the hardest thing I'd ever done. But I was motivated. This was my insurance policy. If I ever met someone in Vietnam, I'd know exactly what they were saying about me, to their family, to their friends. I'd see the red flags that other men missed. After 18 months, I was conversationally fluent. Not perfect, I'd probably never sound like a native speaker, but I could understand normal speed conversations, could read Vietnamese news websites, could follow arguments and jokes and nuance. I took a 2-week trip to Vietnam in early 2020 to test my skills. I stayed in Ho Chi Minh City and pretended I didn't speak any Vietnamese at all. I'd go to markets, restaurants, hotels, and just listen. I heard shopkeepers discussing which foreigners looked rich. I heard taxi drivers on their phones complaining about tourists who couldn't read meters. I heard a restaurant owner tell his staff to give foreigners smaller portions at the same price. Nothing malicious, really, just the normal behind-the-scenes talk that happens everywhere. But I could understand it all, and that felt like power. I flew back to Portland, quit my consulting work, and made the decision. I was moving to Vietnam. Not permanently at first, just a year to see if I liked it, to see if I could build a life there. And if I met someone, I'd keep my language skills completely secret until I was absolutely sure they were genuine. That was the plan. That was my protection. I wish I could tell you it worked. I arrived in Ho Chi Minh City in September 2020. COVID was still a factor, but Vietnam had handled it well. Strict lockdowns, aggressive contact tracing, borders mostly closed except for returning citizens and long-term visa holders. I'd gotten a 1-year visa through a business sponsorship program. I rented an apartment in District 2, a neighborhood popular with expats. Modern building, gym, pool, security guard who spoke some English. I set up my workspace for remote IT contracts with U.S. clients. I kept Portland hours, which meant I worked at night in Vietnam and slept during the day. It was isolating but manageable. For the first month, I didn't look for relationships. I explored the city. I practiced my Vietnamese silently in my head while pretending to be a tourist. I'd go to local markets and cafes where no English was spoken, just listening, absorbing. I stayed at different hotels to test my language comprehension. That's how I met Nung. The Rex Hotel in District 1, not the famous one. A smaller place with the same name was where I booked 3 nights to explore the city center. Nung was the receptionist. She was maybe 28, pretty in a natural way, minimal makeup, hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, professional demeanor. Her English was decent, but not fluent. She helped me check in, explained the breakfast hours, offered to call a taxi for me. "You are from America?" she asked as she handed me the key card. "Portland, Oregon," I said. "First time in Vietnam? Second time. I came last year for 2 weeks. Loved it so much, I decided to stay longer." She smiled. "That's very nice. You like Vietnamese food?" "Love it." "Any recommendations around here?" She pulled out a tourist map and marked 3 restaurants with a pen. "These are good, not expensive, very authentic. If you need help with anything, here is my contact." She wrote her information on the back of a business card. Sometimes easier to message than call hotel. It was friendly, professional, nothing pushy. I thanked her and went to my room. I didn't message her that first day, but the next evening, I asked her where I could find good bun cha, one of my favorite Vietnamese dishes. She recommended a place 2 blocks away and offered to write down what to order so I could show the staff. We started chatting, just friendly small talk. How long had she worked at the hotel? 4 years. Where was she from? Bien Hoa, about 30 kilometers from the city. Did she like working with tourists? Sometimes some were nice, some were demanding, but it was steady work. On my 3rd day, I mentioned I was looking for a longer-term place to stay, maybe a serviced apartment. She offered to help me look online during her break. We sat in the hotel lobby with her laptop, scrolling through rental listings, her explaining which neighborhoods were good for expats, which had markets nearby, which had reliable internet. I found a place in Thu Duc that looked perfect. She called the landlord for me, negotiated the monthly rate down by about $45, and arranged a viewing. When I checked out of the hotel, I thanked her and asked if I could take her to dinner to show appreciation for all her help. "You don't have to do that," she said. "I'd like to, if you're comfortable with it." She thought about it for a moment. "Okay, but you let me choose the restaurant. I take you to real Vietnamese place, not tourist place." That dinner changed everything. Nung took me to a local restaurant in District 5 Cho Lan, the Chinatown area where the menu had no English and the clientele was entirely Vietnamese families. She ordered for both of us. Hot pot with fresh vegetables, thinly sliced beef, shrimp, noodles, and a spicy broth that was incredible. We talked for 3 hours. She asked about my life in America, why I'd left, what I was looking for in Vietnam. I told her about the divorce, the layoff, the feeling that I'd spent 50 years going through the motions and wanted to finally live. She told me about her life too. She'd grown up poor in Bien Hoa. Her father had died when she was 19, motorcycle accident, no life insurance, left the family with debt. She'd moved to Ho Chi Minh City to work, sending money home to her mother and younger sister every month. She'd dated a Korean guy for 2 years. They'd met at the hotel, but he'd gone back to Seoul and stopped answering her messages. That was a year ago. I think maybe foreign men say, "I love you" easy, but don't mean it, she said. Just words to get what they want. Not all of us, I said. She smiled sadly. Maybe, but hard to know until too late. There was something genuine about her sadness, her caution. She wasn't performing. She was just a woman who'd been hurt and was hesitant to trust again. I understood that feeling completely. When I paid the bill, about $25 for everything, she tried to give me cash for her half. "Please don't," I said. "You gave me your time and knowledge. Let me buy you dinner. You already paid for the hot pot. Let me pay for the drinks at least." We compromised. She paid for the drinks. We walked around District 5 for another hour, talking about music, movies, Differences between Vietnamese and American culture. Nothing romantic happened that night, just a connection forming. Before we said goodbye, she told me, "You are different from other foreign men I meet. More quiet, more thoughtful." "Is that good or bad?" I asked. "It's good," she said. "I like thoughtful." We exchanged numbers, real numbers, not just work contacts. And I went back to my new apartment in Thu Duc, feeling something I hadn't felt since before my divorce, hopeful. Nung and I started spending time together regularly, once or twice a week at first dinners, walks along the Saigon River, trips to temples and markets. She was patient with my supposed language barrier. I'd point at things, and she'd teach me words. I'd pretend to struggle with pronunciation even though I knew exactly what I was saying. She never asked me for money. When we'd go out, she'd always offer to split the bill. When I'd insist on paying, she'd look uncomfortable, like she was taking advantage. That made me trust her more. After 2 months of dating, she invited me to meet her family in Bien Hoa. This was the first real test of my secret. We took a taxi to her hometown, a smaller city, more industrial than Ho Chi Minh, with lots of factories and construction. Her family lived in a modest house in a narrow alley, concrete walls, tile floors, small courtyard with potted plants. Her mother was maybe 55, a tiny woman with graying hair who smiled when she saw me. Her younger sister Lynn was 24, worked at a karaoke bar, dressed fashionably in ripped jeans and a crop top. Nung introduced me, explaining I was the American friend she'd been telling them about. Her mother gave me a polite bow with hands pressed together and said something that Nung translated. "Welcome to our home. Thank you for taking care of my daughter." We sat on plastic stools in the courtyard, drinking iced tea. Nung's mother asked questions. Nung translated for me. "She asks where you are from in America. She asks if you have children. She asks what work you do." I'd answer in English. Nung would translate back. Normal family curiosity. But I was listening carefully to the conversations happening around me. Nung's sister asked their mother quietly, "Is he rich?" Nung shushed her. "Don't ask like that. It's rude." Her mother said, "But you need to know. If it's serious, you need to be sure he can take care of you." Nung replied, "Mom, I don't need him to take care of me. I can earn my own money." That exchange made me feel good. She was defending herself as independent. She wasn't focused on my money. Later, Nung's aunt arrived, her mother's older sister, who ran a small noodle stall nearby. She brought food, sandwiches, dessert, fresh fruit. We ate together, and the aunt asked Nung when I was going to propose. Nung looked embarrassed. "Auntie, we've only been together a few months." The aunt laughed. "Hurry up. Foreign men like to decide quickly." I pretended not to understand any of this. I just smiled and nodded when they looked at me. That visit went well. Her family seemed genuinely kind, normal. No red flags beyond the natural curiosity about my financial stability, which made sense given their economic situation. Over the next 6 months, I visited several more times. I grew fond of Nung's mother. She reminded me of my own mom, hardworking and selfless. I'd bring groceries when I visited, slip her mother some cash for household expenses, usually about $45. Nung would protest, but her mother would accept gratefully. Everything seemed genuine. In March 2021, 8 months into our relationship, I proposed. Nothing fancy, just the two of us at a rooftop cafe overlooking the city. I'd bought a simple gold ring. Vietnamese women prefer gold to diamonds, and asked her in my broken Vietnamese that I'd been learning from her, "Will you be my wife?" She cried. She said yes. We called her mother together to share the news. Her mother cried too, said prayers of gratitude, said I was a blessing to the family. We planned to get married in June. I offered to bring her to America. I could sponsor her for a spouse visa. We could live in Portland or somewhere with a Vietnamese community like San Jose. But Nung hesitated. "Can we stay in Vietnam? For a few years at least? My mother is getting older. My sister is still figuring out her life. I want to be close to them." I understood. Family was important to her. And honestly, I was enjoying Vietnam. Why not stay? We registered our marriage at the government office in Bien Hoa, Vietnam's version of a courthouse wedding. Simple ceremony, just us, her family, and 2 witnesses. We took photos, signed papers, went out for a nice lunch, I transferred $50,000 into a joint Vietnamese bank account for household expenses and emergencies. I found us a nice two-bedroom apartment in Thu Duc, close enough to visit her family regularly, but with enough space for us to have privacy. I furnished it modestly, bought a good bed, a decent couch, kitchen equipment, a new laptop for Nung. She quit her hotel job. I was making enough from my remote IT contracts to support both of us comfortably. She'd manage the home, cook, handle bills and errands, learn English better, maybe eventually find work she enjoyed more than reception. We were building a life together, and I was happy. For the first year of our marriage, I continued listening carefully to every conversation around me, waiting for red flags, waiting for something that would confirm my paranoia was justified. But I heard nothing concerning. When Nung talked to her mother, it was about normal things, recipes, family gossip, health issues. When she talked to friends, she complained about normal married life stuff. I left my towels on the floor. I worked at night and slept all day, so our schedules were off. I was boring because I didn't like going to clubs. Nothing alarming. Just normal relationship friction. I started to relax. Started to think maybe my paranoia had been overblown. Maybe not every Southeast Asian relationship was a scam. Maybe I'd actually found someone genuine. That belief lasted until year 3. The shift started with Nung's sister Lin. She'd been visiting occasionally once every few months, but suddenly it became weekly, sometimes twice weekly. She'd show up unannounced, stay for hours, speak rapid Vietnamese with Nung in the living room while I worked in the bedroom. I could hear everything. At first, their conversations were normal. Lin complaining about her karaoke bar job, about her boyfriend who wouldn't commit, about money problems. Nung would offer advice, sometimes lend her small amounts, a couple $100s here and there. But then the conversation started changing. Lin would ask about our finances. How much money did I make? How much was in our account? Had Nung convinced me to buy property yet? Nung would say she was working on it, that I was careful with money, didn't like big purchases, needed more time to trust the idea. Lin would laugh and say things like, "You have to be smarter. Foreign men are easy to fool." Those comments bothered me, but I rationalized. Lin was young, immature. She'd been working in karaoke bars and probably had a cynical view of men. That didn't mean Nung felt the same way. Then came the conversation that destroyed me. It was a Thursday afternoon in September 2023, about 2.5 years into our marriage. I was in the bedroom, supposedly napping before my night shift. Nung and Lin were in the kitchen, maybe 15 feet away, separated by a thin wall and a door that wasn't fully closed. They were speaking rapidly, voices low but not whispering. They assumed I was asleep. They assumed even if I were awake, I couldn't understand. I lay perfectly still, eyes closed, and listened. Lin was asking about money again. When could Nung access more? When would we buy a house? Nung sounded frustrated. He doesn't like buying a house, says it's not safe, doesn't understand Vietnamese law. Then buy land. Tell him it's a good investment. I tried. He doesn't trust it. Then Lin laughed and said something that made my blood freeze. Just be patient. He's old already. Works a lot. High stress. In a few years, you'll be a rich widow. Don't worry. I stopped breathing, waiting for Nung to object, to defend me, to say something horrified. She didn't. She laughed. A soft, slightly bitter laugh. Then she said, "He's very gentle, easy to manipulate, but it's so boring, sister. Like living with a shadow. Doesn't talk, doesn't go out, just sits and works on the computer. Quan is so much more fun." Lin giggled. "Are you still talking to Quan?" "Shh." Nung glanced toward the bedroom. "Speak quietly. I'll call you tonight." They moved on to other topics. Something about shopping, about going to a new coffee shop. Normal sister talk. I lay in that bed for another hour, completely still, while my entire world collapsed around me. I didn't sleep that night, didn't cry, didn't rage. I just lay there in the dark next to my wife, processing what I'd heard. Like living with a shadow. That phrase kept repeating in my head. I'd tried so hard to be a good husband. Thoughtful, supportive, respectful. I'd given her space, never pressured her, never demanded anything. I thought I was being considerate. But to her, I was boring, invisible, a ghost in my own marriage. And Quan. Who the hell was Quan? I wanted to confront her immediately. Wake her up. tell her in fluent Vietnamese that I'd heard everything, demand answers. But I didn't, because I needed to know more. I needed to understand the full scope of this before I made any moves. So I continued playing the clueless foreigner, and I started investigating. Over the next 2 weeks, I became a spy in my own home. When Nung showered, I'd check her phone. I knew her passcode. She'd never hidden it from me because she assumed I couldn't read Vietnamese anyway. I found messages with someone named Quan. Hundreds of them, going back 8 months. The messages weren't explicitly sexual, but they were intimate. Pet names. He called her my love. She called him by an affectionate nickname. They'd exchange voice messages where I could hear them laughing, teasing each other. She'd complain about me. My husband is so boring. Sits at the computer all day. He'd send supportive messages. Be patient. A few more years and it's done. There were photos too. Nothing nude, but selfies of her at cafes and restaurants I didn't recognize. Dressed nicely, makeup done, places she'd supposedly been shopping or running errands, but clearly hadn't gone alone. I scrolled back through months of messages. Quan was an ex-boyfriend from before the Korean guy. He worked construction in Binh Duong province, about an hour from Ho Chi Minh City. They'd reconnected about 8 months after Nung and I got married. She'd reached out to him just to catch up, and it had evolved from there. The messages made it clear they'd seen each other in person at least a dozen times. Days when Nung said she was visiting her mother or helping Lin with something. I checked our joint bank account next. We'd started with $50,000. Now we had about $27,000. I'd assumed the money was going to normal expenses, rent, food, utilities, family support, and some of it was. But I found transfers to Lin's account, small amounts $200 to $400 at a time. Over 18 months, approximately $15,000 had been quietly moved. I also found searches on Nung's browser history. She'd been looking at property in Bien Hoa and surrounding areas. Houses, land, investment opportunities. All the websites were in Vietnamese. She'd been researching this for months. The full picture came together. I was an investment, a retirement plan. Nung, her mother, Lin, possibly her entire family. They were all waiting for me to either buy property in Nung's name or die, and leave her whatever remained. Meanwhile, Quan was the actual relationship, the fun one, the one she actually wanted. I was the ATM who happened to sleep in her bed twice a month. I spent 2 weeks preparing. I was methodical, just like always. I documented everything. Screenshots of messages, recordings of conversations legal in Vietnam for personal use, financial records showing the transfers, search histories, everything. I moved $20,000 from our joint account to my U.S. bank account, left $7,000 in the Vietnamese account for her. It wasn't about taking everything. I just wanted to secure what was mine before this got ugly. Then I waited for the right moment. It was a Wednesday evening. We were having dinner, broken rice with grilled pork. Normal meal. Nung was scrolling her phone between bites. I was supposedly reviewing code on my laptop at the table. I looked up and said, in perfect Vietnamese, "You and Lin had an interesting conversation the other day. I heard everything." Nung's chopsticks stopped mid-air. Her eyes went wide. She stared at me like I'd just started speaking an alien language. "What?" she said in English. I switched back to Vietnamese. I said, "I heard everything. About Quan. About the plan. About how you think I'm boring like a shadow." Her face went through rapid changes, confusion, disbelief, calculation, then something cold I'd never seen before. "How long?" she asked quietly in Vietnamese. "From the beginning," I said in her language. "I learned Vietnamese before I came to Vietnam. I understood everything from day one. Every conversation with your mother, with Lin, with your friends, all of it." She set down her chopsticks. For a long moment, she just stared at me. Then she asked, "Why? Why didn't you say anything?" "Because I wanted to know the truth. And now you know." "Yes, now I know." We didn't yell, didn't cry. We just sat at that table and had the most honest conversation of our entire relationship. She asked if I'd recorded anything. I said yes. She asked if I'd moved money. I said yes. She asked what I wanted. "I want a divorce," I said. She nodded. "Okay, that's it? Just okay?" She shrugged. You know everything. We can't continue. If you want divorce, then divorce. Was any of it real? I asked. The first time we met? The first dinner? Anything? She thought about it for a long time. Finally, she said, "You are a good person. Kind. But I don't love you. Never loved you. I'm sorry." At least she was honest. The divorce was surprisingly simple. Vietnam's divorce process is straightforward when there are no children and no disputed property. We agreed I'd keep the money I'd moved to my U.S. account. She'd keep the Vietnamese account balance, the furniture, the motorbike we'd bought, the security deposit on the apartment. I didn't contest anything. I just wanted out. 3 weeks later, I had my divorce decree. 2 weeks after that, I was on a flight back to Portland. Total financial loss. About $75,000 that transfers to Lynn, the family support that had been split with Quan, the wedding expenses, the furniture and deposits I left behind. Not devastating compared to some of the stories I'd heard, but it wasn't about the money. I came back to Oregon with about $245,000. Enough to start over. More than many men in my situation had left, but I felt emptier than I'd ever felt in my life. I've been back in the U.S. for 6 months now. I'm 57 years old, living in a one-bedroom apartment in Beaverton that I'm renting month to month. I'm doing contract IT work, making decent money, getting by. I deleted all my Vietnamese study apps the day I landed in Portland. I can't hear the language anymore without feeling physically sick. 3 years of marriage, 18 months of studying before that, all of it contaminated now. I think about Nung sometimes. Not with anger, I don't have the energy for anger. I think about her with something closer to pity for both of us. She spent 3 years pretending to love a man she found boring, cooking meals for him, sleeping next to him, building a life that was entirely performance. That must have been exhausting. And I spent 3 years thinking I'd finally found someone who wanted me, someone who saw past the quiet, awkward IT guy to the person underneath. But she never saw me at all. I was just a shadow. A boring shadow with money. The phrase that haunts me isn't about the money or the plan or even Quan. It's this. Like living with a shadow. I thought being quiet and respectful made me a good husband. I thought giving her space and never pressuring her showed love. But to her, I was just invisible, not even interesting enough to genuinely dislike. Just nothing. I don't know if I'll ever date again. The idea of trusting someone, of believing they want me for me and not for what I can provide, feels impossible now. Here's what I want you to understand if you're thinking about moving to Southeast Asia for a relationship, or if you're already there. First, learning the language isn't just about protecting yourself from scams, though it absolutely does that. It's about understanding the culture you're entering. If you can't communicate beyond basic tourist phrases, you're fundamentally dependent on your partner for every interaction. That dependency creates a power imbalance that's easy to exploit. Second, the family dynamics matter more than you think. In Vietnamese culture and Thai, Filipino, and most Southeast Asian cultures, extended family is deeply involved in relationships and finances. If her entire family is encouraging the relationship quickly, being unusually welcoming to a stranger, it might not be genuine warmth. It might be strategic. Third, pay attention to how she talks about you when she thinks you can't understand. The private conversations reveal the truth. If you can learn even basic comprehension of the language, do it. You don't have to be fluent, just enough to catch the tone, the truth behind the translation. Fourth, watch the money. I thought I was being generous by supporting her family. But when you add up monthly support, emergency payments, gifts, investments, it compounds fast. And if it's going into accounts you can't access or property you can't own, you have zero protection if things go wrong. Fifth, real love doesn't require you to be a different person. I thought I needed to be quiet and undemanding to keep Nung happy. But genuine partners love you for who you are, not for how little space you take up. If you're constantly trying to be less demanding, less boring, less present, that's not love. That's accommodation. Sixth, the boring guys finish last in these situations. The scammers specifically target men who are introverted, respectful, wealthy, but not flashy. They want someone who won't cause drama, won't ask too many questions, won't make waves. If you're naturally quiet and thoughtful like I am, you're actually more vulnerable, not less. I know there are genuine relationships between Western men and Southeast Asian women. I'm not saying every relationship is a scam, but the scam operations are so sophisticated now, so patient, so well organized, that even learning the language and documenting everything might not be enough. The question you have to ask yourself is, am I willing to risk my retirement savings, my emotional health, and years of my life on the chance this is real? For some men, the answer is yes. The loneliness is so profound that even a performed relationship feels better than nothing. I understand that. I lived it. But I'm telling you from the other side, it's not better. Living with someone who secretly finds you boring and is waiting for you to die is so much worse than being alone. Because at least when you're alone, you're not being lied to every single day. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd revealed my Vietnamese skills on day one. If I'd told Nung at that first dinner, by the way, I speak Vietnamese fluently. Would she have backed off? Would she have been honest about her situation from the start? Would we have just been friends instead of entering this 3-year performance? Or would she have just switched tactics, found a different way to play the role? I'll never know. What I do know is this. The language barrier isn't the only barrier. The real barrier is the loneliness that makes men like me willing to believe anything, ignore any red flag, rationalize any inconsistency. Because the alternative admitting we're being played is too painful to accept. I had every advantage. I understood the language. I was methodical and careful. I documented everything. I even caught the scam before it fully matured and left with most of my savings intact. And I still feel destroyed. Because it's not about the money. It never was. It's about hearing the woman you love describe you as a shadow, as boring, as someone she's enduring until you die so she can collect. That's what I heard in my own kitchen, in my own home, in the language I'd spent 2 years learning specifically to protect myself. And that's what I'll remember for the rest of my life. My name is Dennis Hargrove. I'm 57 years old. I spent 18 months learning Vietnamese in secret, 3.5 years married to a woman who thought I couldn't understand a word she said. And I finally overheard the truth in my own kitchen. I lost $75,000 and 3 years of my life. But more than that, I lost the ability to trust my own judgment, to believe someone could genuinely want me, to see quiet consideration as a strength instead of a fatal weakness. Don't be Dennis Hargrove. Don't spend years learning a language just to discover you were right to be paranoid. Don't marry someone hoping they'll eventually love you. Don't make yourself small and quiet thinking that's what it takes to keep someone. And most importantly, don't go to Southeast Asia thinking a change of location will fix what's broken inside you. It won't. It'll just mean you get to be lonely and exploited in a more exotic location. The real world, as lonely and difficult as it is still better than living as a shadow in someone else's plan. Trust me on that. I learned Vietnamese fluently just to hear the truth I already knew. Like living with a shadow. That's what I was. And once you hear that about yourself, you can never unhear it.